Episode 1. The night the cell was sealed. They said it was impossible. The walls of Blackthorn Prison had never been breached, not in 100 years. The stones were thick as tombs, the locks forged in fire and iron. Each cell was a coffin of concrete and despair, guarded by men who had long forgotten mercy. And yet, one morning, cell 43 was found empty. I remember that night with a weight in my chest. The rain lashed against the bars, a storm so violent it seemed the sky itself wanted to crack open. Inside the corridor of Block C, the air was heavier than usual, thick with the smell of damp stone and old sweat. The guards had checked the cell as they always did, bolted the door, rattled the chains, sealed the latch with wax. The prisoner, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, had said nothing. He simply stared through the bars as though watching something only he could see. At midnight, the guards heard it, a sound like a whisper threading through the stones. They swore it was the wind, though no wind could echo like words spoken through a throat. "Still here," the voice seemed to murmur. "Still here." But when dawn arrived, the impossible truth lay before them. The door was untouched, the lock was unbroken, the seal was unmarked. 3 guards swore on their lives they had not left their posts, and yet cell 43 stood open, the straw bed cold, the air inside empty as a grave. The prisoner was gone. Panic rippled through the prison. No man had ever escaped Blackthorn, and certainly not from a sealed cell. They dragged torches down every corridor, searched every shadow, but there was nothing. No broken bars, no tunnel in the floor, not even the marks of fingernails on stone. Only one detail made their blood run cold. A smear of blood on the far wall, a mark that hadn't been there before. The stain was small at first, just the size of a coin, but the longer the guards stared at it, the more it seemed to spread, seeping into the stone like something alive. One of them reached out against orders and pressed his palm to the wall. He swore later he heard breathing on the other side, slow and deliberate, as though someone, or something, was waiting just beyond. By sunrise, rumors had already spread. The prisoner hadn't escaped at all. He had vanished. Gone without a sound, without a trace, swallowed by the very cell that was meant to hold him. Some said he was never human to begin with, that he was placed in Blackthorn for reasons no one dared to speak. Others whispered the cell itself had claimed him, that the walls were older than the prison, older than the men who built it. But I know what I saw that morning. I saw the empty cell. I saw the blood on the wall. And I saw the terror in the eyes of hardened men who had beaten, broken, and buried prisoners without ever blinking. They were afraid. Afraid not of an escape, but of a return. Because when the light hit that wall just right, the blood looked like a handprint, and it wasn't reaching out. It was reaching in. Episode 2. The blood mark on the wall. They tried to scrub it away. Buckets of water, rags soaked in lye, even knives scraping at the stone. Nothing made the blood disappear. The mark clung stubbornly to the wall of cell 43, as though it were not painted on the surface, but woven deep into the marrow of the rock itself. The guards worked in silence, sweat dripping from their brows, glancing at one another with eyes wide and frantic. It wasn't the blood that unnerved them. They had seen blood before, oceans of it. It was the way it moved. I swear to you, I stood there watching as the crimson stain pulsed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. The longer you looked, the more it seemed to spread, like veins of red creeping through the stone. One guard cursed under his breath, saying it was a trick of the light, the flicker of torches playing games. But then, the wall whispered. Yes, whispered. A thin, hushed sound, no louder than breath. No words at first, only the suggestion of something trying to form syllables from the cracks. The men froze. One of them, Harris, I think, dropped his rag and stepped back. "It's still here," he muttered. His face had gone pale, his voice barely his own. He never left. They ordered Harris to be silent, but his words clung to the air heavier than the stink of lye. That night, Harris refused to take his post. By dawn, he was gone too. Not vanished, no. His body was found in the prison yard, eyes open, mouth stuffed with straw from cell 43's bed. After that, no one dared touch the wall again. The mark was left to grow, to breathe. The warden himself came down, his boots echoing like hammer blows on the stone floor. He stared at the blood in silence, jaw clenched tight, before dismissing the guards with a wave of his hand. I lingered in the corridor after they left, watching the warden press his ear to the wall. For a moment his shoulders stiffened, and I thought he might recoil like the others. But instead, he smiled, just barely. A smile not of comfort, but of recognition, as though he had been waiting for this. That was when I realized the truth no one dared to speak aloud. The warden knew more about prisoner 43 than he had ever admitted. And in that silence, with the torches sputtering low, I swear I heard words taking shape. From inside the stone came a voice, not desperate, not weak, but calm. A voice too steady for a man trapped. "Still here," it said again. But this time, it added something more, something that made the marrow in my bones freeze solid. "Still here, and watching you." Episode 3. The Prisoner's Last Words. There are words that outlive the mouths that spoke them, words that rot in the air like spoiled fruit, clinging to walls and shadows long after the speaker has gone. Prisoner 43 had such words, and though his body had vanished, his sentences lingered like ghosts. It was the chaplain who remembered first. He recalled visiting cell 43 the week before the disappearance, carrying his worn Bible under one arm. The prisoner had sat on the straw bed, his lips moving endlessly, but not in prayer. The chaplain leaned close, thinking he was muttering confessions. What he heard instead made his blood chill. "Walls are doors," the prisoner whispered. "Every stone has a name. Speak it, and the stone will open." At the time, the chaplain dismissed it as madness. Many prisoners lost themselves to delirium, spinning riddles to comfort their decay. But when cell 43 was found empty, those words clawed back into his memory. The warden, ever cautious, ordered the guards to search the archives for anything written by the vanished man. That was when they uncovered the notebook, a thin, ragged journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard, filled with scrawls that looked more like scratches than writing. I saw the pages with my own eyes. The ink was smeared, some lines etched so hard the paper nearly tore. Over and over again, he had written strange phrases, layered atop one another like chants. Names unlock, stones remember, blood binds. Some pages contained diagrams, arches, keys, circles intersecting with lines of symbols none could read. And at the very back, written in a steadier hand than the rest, was a single sentence that stopped the room cold. "I will not escape. I will enter." The guards shifted uneasily as the warden read those words aloud. No one wanted to admit what they were all thinking. Cell 43 had not been broken. It had been used. That night, the notebook was locked away in the evidence room. But by morning, it was gone. The lock on the cabinet was untouched. The key was still in the warden's pocket. The notebook had vanished as cleanly as its author. Some said the prisoner had taken it back from wherever he had gone. Others swore the notebook had never been written at all, that it was only the cell whispering through the paper. But I remember one final detail. The chaplain confessed to me, voice trembling, that on the last night he saw prisoner 43. The man's lips were bleeding as he whispered. He pressed his cracked mouth to the wall, smearing red into the stone, and whispered a word over and over. The chaplain swore he had never heard the word before, nor since, but that it wasn't English, nor Episode 4. The Guard Who Heard Knocking. The silence of Blackthorn Prison was its own kind of torture. Long after midnight, when the storm winds hushed and the rats scuttled into corners, the corridors became catacombs of stone and breath. Guards knew to fear that silence, for silence was never empty. It was waiting. It was during one such hour that a guard named Rowan heard it. At first he thought it was his own heartbeat, thudding too loud in his ears after pacing the corridor. But no, it came again, steady, deliberate. A knock. 1, 2, 3. He froze outside cell 43, the cell that should have been hollow, dead, abandoned. And yet from within, the sound came, the distinct rhythm of knuckles against wood. But there was no wood inside that cell, only stone, cold and merciless. Rowan pressed his ear to the bars. The knocks grew louder, closer, until he swore they were rapping against the inside of the door itself. His throat dried. He called out, "Who's there?" Though he hated himself for it the moment the words left his lips. The answer came not in words, but in a reply. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Rowan staggered back, fumbling for his lantern. The light shook wildly as he raised it to the door. That was when he saw it. On the metal food tray slit, a fresh mark had been scratched into the iron, not with a tool, with fingernails. The number 43. Rowan's courage broke. He called for the other guards, voice cracking like dry wood. But when they arrived, the cell was still, silent. The mark remained, etched deep into the tray slot, but the knocking had ceased. The others mocked him, said he'd imagined it, said his nerves had rotted from too many night shifts. They even wiped the mark away with a cloth, laughing as if that erased what Rowan had heard. But Rowan wasn't laughing. He refused to stand post at cell 43 again. 2 nights later, they found him in the infirmary, pale as wax. He claimed he hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he said, he heard it, the knocking. Not from the cell now, but from inside his skull, like someone trapped just behind his eyes, begging to be let through. The doctor dismissed it as hysteria, but I saw Rowan before they took him away. His hands trembled, his lips quivered, but his eyes, God help me, his eyes were fixed on the wall. He whispered to me, voice thin as thread, "It's not knocking to get out, it's knocking to be invited in." That night, as the storm rolled back over Blackthorn, the guards heard something again. Not knocks this time, but a chorus of faint tapping, rising and falling, echoing through every... Episode 5. The Warden's Secret. Warden Blackwood was a man carved from stone, or so people believed. He ruled Blackthorn Prison with an iron spine and an unforgiving stare. Nothing rattled him. Not riots, not murders, not the endless screams of men who clawed at their own sanity. But when cell 43 fell silent, when the blood marks spread and the knocking began, his mask cracked. I saw it the night he descended into Block C alone. He dismissed the guards, saying he would inspect the cell himself. His boots echoed against the stones, his lantern swinging low. I followed at a distance, too curious or too foolish to stay away. When he reached the cell, he did not look afraid. No, he looked expectant, as though he were greeting an old acquaintance. He set the lantern down and placed a hand on the wall where the blood still clung. "I told you to stay quiet," he whispered. My stomach turned to ice. He wasn't surprised by the voice in the stone. He knew. I heard the wall groan softly, like a living thing stirring in its sleep. Blackwood's expression hardened. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. He opened it with careful fingers. Symbols covered the page, crude yet deliberate, drawn in thick black ink. "They'll find out soon," he said, his voice low. "But not yet. Not until you're ready." I dared not breathe. The warden had spoken to cell 43 as if it were no cell at all, but a partner, a secret. Later, I learned whispers of the prison's foundations. Blackthorn was built over ruins, older than the city itself. Some said there had been a chapel there. Others claimed a crypt. The truth was buried under layers of history, forgotten, or deliberately erased. And yet Blackwood knew. He had always known. When the prison was first built, records said a man had insisted upon the placement of certain cells, their numbers, their alignments with the walls. That man was a younger Blackwood. He had overseen the construction with meticulous care, ensuring cell 43 stood exactly where he wanted it, directly above the sealed chamber beneath. Now, as I watched from the shadows, he pressed his forehead to the wall and spoke words I could not understand. Not English, not Latin, but the same guttural tongue the chaplain had once described. The blood on the stone shivered, then seeped deeper, as if drinking his voice. When he finished, he turned, lantern light casting hollows in his face. For the briefest moment, his eyes flicked toward the darkness where I hid. And I swear he smiled, not the smile of a man caught, but of a man proud his secret was finally witnessed. The warden left the cell then, locking the corridor behind him, but his words stayed, echoing in my skull long after he was gone. He didn't vanish. He was delivered. Episode 6. The Midnight Scream. Blackthorn Prison was never silent for long. Men muttered in their sleep. Chains clinked in restless hands. Rats scurried across stone floors. But on that night, the silence was perfect, so sharp it rang in the ears like a knife drawn across glass. Every prisoner seemed to feel it, lying awake in their bunks, staring into the dark. Something was coming. It began at the stroke of midnight. A scream tore through Block C, a sound so piercing it rattled the bars. It was not the cry of pain nor madness, but the scream of a man falling forever into blackness. Guards rushed to their posts, certain a fight had broken out. But the sound didn't come from any prisoner. It came from cell 43, the empty cell. The scream rose and fell, reverberating through the stone, louder than thunder. Prisoners all along the corridor pressed themselves to the bars, eyes wide with terror. Then, as though seized by invisible hands, they began to scream too, dozens of throats crying in unison, matching the pitch, the rhythm, the agony of that single impossible voice. I was there. I saw hardened killers, men who had slit throats without blinking, convulse as they clutched their own necks, their mouths opening wider than flesh should allow. They screamed until blood flecked their lips, and still they could not stop. The guards beat their batons against the bars, shouting for order, but their voices were drowned beneath the tide of shrieks. The very walls shook, dust falling from the ceiling, lanterns swaying violently as if the prison itself were crying out. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise ceased. The corridor fell into absolute silence. Dozens of men collapsed onto their bunks, gasping, weeping, some whispering prayers through cracked lips. The guards stood frozen, clutching their weapons like children clutching toys in the dark. But cell 43 was different. From inside came the sound of breathing. Long, slow, steady, as though someone sat calmly in the darkness, untouched by the chaos. The guards dared not enter. They only stood there, staring at the door, their knuckles white around their keys. And then came the final horror. On the far wall of the cell, just above the bloodstain, words had appeared. No hand had written them, no brush had painted them. They were carved deep into the stone as though by claws. Not escaped. Returning. No one slept that night. The prisoners lay trembling in their bunks. The guards paced with hollow eyes, and the warden locked himself in his office with the old parchment spread across his desk. But all of us knew the truth. The scream had not been a warning. It had been a herald. Episode 7. The Disappearing Cell Door. By the 7th night, no guard wanted to patrol Block C. They drew straws for the duty. And those unlucky enough to lose walked the corridor with trembling lanterns, their eyes fixed firmly ahead, refusing to glance at cell 43. Yet fear has a way of forcing the eyes where they should never wander. It was Galloway who saw it first. He swore the cell door rippled, as if it were nothing more than a veil of smoke. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and the iron was solid again. Convinced exhaustion had played its tricks, he said nothing. But the next night, with 4 witnesses at his side, the impossible repeated itself. The door vanished. One moment there it was. Iron bars, rust biting their edges, chains clinking with the draft. The next, nothing. Only an empty frame. A black rectangle yawning into a void where the cell should have been. The lantern light did not touch the inside. It stopped at the threshold, swallowed whole. The guards froze. None dared step forward. They held their breath, waiting, watching, their hearts pounding louder than their boots ever had. After less than a minute, the door shimmered back into being. The rust, the bolts, the number 43 painted above, all exactly as before. But one thing was different. The camera nailed above the corridor, installed years ago to record disturbances, had captured it. Later, when the footage was reviewed in the warden's office, every man present felt his stomach turn to water. The tape showed the guards staring into the void where the door had disappeared. But in the static-laced dark of the cell, something moved. A shape, tall, thin, standing perfectly still, as though it had been waiting for them to look. The recording warped whenever the figure came into focus, the pixels twisting into grotesque patterns, the sound cutting into a low hum that rattled the speakers. Then, just before the door reappeared, the figure turned. Its face, if it had a face, looked directly at the lens, and it smiled. The guards argued. Some claimed the footage was tampered with, others that it was merely a glitch. But those who had been there, who had seen the door blink out of existence with their own eyes, knew the truth. Prisoner 43 had not escaped. He had simply learned to unmake the prison around him. That night, a new rumor took hold among the inmates. They whispered that the cell was no longer a cell at all, but a doorway. A doorway that opened when it pleased, and only for him. I could not shake what I saw in that footage. The figure standing in the dark, patient, calm, smiling. It wasn't trapped, it wasn't lost. It was practicing. Episode 8. The Priest's Warning. When the prison chaplain refused to return to Block C, the warden summoned another man, a priest from the city, Father Marrow. He was old, shoulders bent by years of service, but his eyes were sharp, carrying the weight of someone who had stared too long into darkness. The guards laughed at first. What could a priest do against stone that whispered, against doors that vanished? But they weren't laughing when Father Marrow stepped into cell 43 with nothing but a crucifix and a vial of holy water. I was there, watching through the bars. The air thickened the moment he crossed the threshold, as if the cell itself recognized him. His candle sputtered, its flame twisting sideways though no wind stirred. He raised his crucifix and began to pray. The walls shuddered. It was not an earthquake. The sound was inside the stone, like something shifting beneath the surface, pressing outward. The bloodstain pulsed in rhythm with his words, beating like a heart. Then, with a voice that did not belong to any living man, the cell answered. "Leave." The word crawled through the air like smoke, rattling the lanterns along the corridor. Every prisoner in Block C fell silent, holding their breath, listening. Father Marrow did not flinch. He only pressed the crucifix harder against the wall. "You are bound," he said. "You do not belong here." The stone rippled. I swear I saw it. Stone moving like water, the outline of a face swelling beneath the surface. Features pressed against the wall as though trying to emerge. The mouth opened. "Not bound," it hissed. "Not prisoner. Door." The priest's voice faltered for the first time. His prayer broke, caught in his throat. And in that instant the wall split with a sound like tearing flesh. A black fissure opened, wide enough for a hand to reach through. And something did. A pale arm, long and thin, groped blindly into the air. Fingers scraped against the crucifix, recoiling as if burned. Father Marrow shouted, throwing the holy water onto the breach. Steam hissed. The arm withdrew and the fissure sealed as quickly as it had opened. The priest stumbled out of the cell, drenched in sweat, his lips moving in frantic prayer. He dropped the crucifix and it clattered across the stone. His eyes, God, I'll never forget them. They weren't the eyes of a man who had fought evil. They were the eyes of a man who had seen it win. Before he fled Blackthorn for good, he turned to the warden and delivered a single warning, voice shaking. "You built this place over a grave, but it was never empty. You've locked yourselves inside with it. And when it finishes learning your names, not a wall in the world will hold." Then he left, slamming the gates behind him. And for the first time, even the warden's face showed fear. Episode 9. The Shadow in the Corridor. After Father Marrow fled, the prison tried to return to its routines. Cells locked, meals served. Guards patrolled the corridors as though nothing had changed, but Blackthorn had already shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with something that pressed against the lungs. Even the rats had vanished, leaving only silence behind. It was during one of those silences that the first shadow appeared. A guard named Ellis reported it. He was walking Block C alone, lantern in hand, when he saw a figure at the far end of the corridor. At first he thought it was another guard, tall, thin, shoulders slightly hunched. But when he called out, the figure didn't answer. It only stood there, facing him. Ellis lifted his lantern higher. The light spilled across the corridor, but it never touched the figure. The shadow remained whole, as if the lantern's glow bent away from it. Then it moved. Not walked, not stepped. Slid. A ripple of darkness gliding along the stone, closing the distance without sound. Ellis dropped the lantern. Its flame guttered out, plunging Block C into blackness. He scrambled for his keys, fumbling them with shaking hands. When the other guards found him minutes later, the man was curled against the wall, rocking back and forth, his lips whispering the same words over and over. He smiled at me. "God help me," he smiled. From then on, others began to see it too. A shadow where no body cast it. A silhouette slipping just out of sight. Sometimes it appeared outside the guards' quarters, sometimes near the infirmary, once even reflected in the warden's office window, though no one stood outside. Always the same shape, tall, thin, unmistakable. Prisoner 43. One night I saw it with my own eyes. I was carrying records down the hall when I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I turned, and there it was, half hidden in the bend of the corridor, watching me. I could not see its face, only the faint suggestion of a grin carved into the dark. I froze, my breath shallow, and then it stepped forward. The sound of its footfall was wrong, not leather on stone, not flesh. It was hollow, echoing, as though the floor beneath it were deeper than the prison itself. I ran. Cowardly, yes, but what else could I do? When I glanced back, the corridor was empty. No shadow, no grin, but on the wall where it had stood, 3 scratches marred the stone. 3 vertical lines, freshly carved, bleeding dust. Later that night, when the guards counted the prisoners, 1 cell came up short. A thief named Calder had vanished from his locked cage. No broken bars, no signs of struggle, only 3 scratches left on the inside wall. The shadow was no longer content to be seen. It was taking names. Episode 10. The Prisoners Return. Disappearance had become routine in Blackthorn. 1 name missing from the roll call, 1 cell suddenly emptied. No one spoke of escape anymore. Everyone knew escape was mercy, and mercy had no place here. Still, nothing prepared us for the night when the vanished came back. It was a storm evening, the kind that rattled shutters and drowned the cries of men in thunder. The guards were restless, pacing faster, drinking stronger. I was in Block C when it happened. A scream, sharp and short, cut through the rain. Not the endless wail we had heard before. This was different. This was final. We rushed to the source, cell 43. The cell door stood wide open. The lanterns along the corridor flickered as though something had passed them all at once, extinguishing their flame before sparking it alive again. And inside, on the cold stone floor, lay a body. Not prisoner 43. It was Calder, the thief who had vanished a week earlier. His face was frozen in terror, mouth wide as if caught mid-scream, eyes glassy and unseeing. His skin was pale, clammy, but his wrists were torn raw, as though he had clawed his way back into this world. The guards gagged at the smell. It was not the rot of death, but something worse. A sour, metallic stench, like iron boiling in a furnace. The bed straw was soaked black with it, and the wall, the cursed wall, dripped a dark liquid thicker than water, bleeding as though alive. I could not move. I only stared as Calder's lips twitched. Yes, twitched. The dead man's mouth shivered, and in a voice not his own, a whisper seeped through his teeth. Not escaped, returning. The guards staggered back, some cursing, others crossing themselves. The warden pushed through them, his face like granite, and knelt beside the corpse. He pressed 2 fingers to Calder's temple, as if feeling for something beyond a pulse. Then, without warning, he ordered the body removed, not to the infirmary, not to the mortuary, but to his private office. No one argued, no one dared. But that night I saw more. As they carried Calder away, limp arms dangling, I glanced back into cell 43. The wall was alive with movement. Shadows shifted beneath the stone like hands pressing outward. Dozens of them, clawing to break free. And in the center, faint but unmistakable, a face bloomed from the surface. The same face I had seen on the cursed footage. Prisoner 43. He did not move his lips. He did not need to. The words filled the corridor without sound, rattling through the marrow of my bones. This is not my return. This is only the beginning. The lanterns guttered out, plunging us into blackness, and for the first time I realized the truth. Prisoner 43 had never left. He was spreading. Episode 11. The Warden's Confession. The storm had not ended when the warden summoned us. His office smelled of wet stone and candle wax, the windows rattling as rain pounded the glass. Calder's body lay stretched across the desk, wrapped in a sheet, though his stiffened hand protruded. Fingers curled as though still reaching for something unseen. Warden Blackwood sat behind the corpse, his face shadowed by the flicker of a single flame. His eyes, however, glowed sharp, unblinking. He motioned us closer and we obeyed, though every nerve in me screamed to run. "You deserve to know the truth," he said. His voice was calm, steady, almost rehearsed. This prison was never built to contain men. It was built to contain him. He gestured toward the body, though we all knew he spoke not of Calder, but of prisoner 43. Blackthorn's origins unraveled in his words. Decades ago, before the prison rose, this ground was already marked. Beneath the soil lay ruins, remnants of an order long forgotten, men who bound something in stone with blood and prayer. The warden had found the records as a young man, hidden manuscripts no priest dared to preserve. He knew the site was cursed. He also knew it was powerful. When they granted me control of Blackthorn, he continued, I ensured cell 43 was built on that chamber, directly above it. He was not our prisoner by accident. He was chosen. The room fell cold. The warden admitted he had overseen the transfer of prisoner 43 personally, years ago. The man was not like the others. He carried names that made walls tremble, words that could open what should remain sealed. Blackwood had locked him away not to punish, but to keep his mouth from reaching the stone. And yet, the warden whispered, his voice tight. He spoke anyway. His hand trembled for the first time as he revealed the parchment we had seen before, covered in black sigils. These are not words of men, he said. They are maps, keys. He was never trying to escape. He was teaching the walls. And now, he looked at Calder's shrouded body, at the hand still twitching even in death. The walls have learned. One of the guards shouted at him then, demanding why he had never told us, why he had condemned us all to rot with whatever lived beneath Blackthorn. The warden's face twisted with fury. Because knowledge is a prison, he spat. The moment you know his name, you belong to him. I kept you ignorant to keep you alive. Silence swallowed the office. Rain hammered harder. Thunder cracked. Then, faint but clear, Calder's body shifted. The sheet rippled, the corpse arching, and in a hollow voice that was not his, the dead man spoke. You belong to me anyway. The lantern went out. Episode 12. The Final Escape. The night after Calder's corpse spoke, Blackthorn became a grave waiting to close. No one slept. Guards clutched rifles they knew would be useless. Prisoners whispered prayers through trembling lips, and the warden locked himself inside Block C, muttering over his parchment like a mad priest. The storm above raged without pause, as though the sky itself wanted to drown what was about to happen. It began with the doors. At first, only one or two swung open, iron locks snapping as if struck by unseen hammers. But soon, every cell in Block C groaned and burst wide. Slamming against the stone, prisoners clung to their bunks, refusing to step outside, too afraid of freedom that did not belong to them. Then the chains rattled, not the chains on the walls, but the chains in the very air. An invisible clinking, thousands of links dragging across stone, circling the corridors. Lanterns shattered in unison, plunging us into a darkness broken only by lightning flashing through barred windows. And in that light he came, prisoner 43. No longer a shadow, no longer a whisper. He walked the corridor like a man, though his body flickered as if stitched from smoke and flesh. His eyes glowed faintly, two coals smoldering in the void of his face. And his mouth curved into that same smile I had seen on the recording. A smile of triumph. The warden stepped forward, parchment raised high, shouting words none of us understood. The sigils blazed briefly, black fire licking the air. For a moment it seemed he might hold the thing back, but prisoner 43 only laughed, a sound that cracked the stone, that bent the air. Your walls were my lessons, he said. Your prison was my door. With that, the parchment ignited in the warden's hands, reducing to ash that clung to his face like soot. He fell to his knees, eyes wide with the horror of a man who had built his own ruin. Then the walls opened. I do not mean they cracked, I mean they opened. The stone split like lips parting to speak, revealing black corridors that led nowhere. Staircases plunging into endless void, hands clawing from the gaps. The prison was no longer a building, it was a throat. Prisoners screamed, guards fled, but it didn't matter. Doors slammed shut behind them, locking of their own will. I watched men vanish into walls, swallowed whole, their cries cut short. Prisoner 43 turned once, staring directly at me. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, a face both human and not, shifting between bone and shadow. He raised a hand as if in farewell. Episode 13, Aftermath, the missing guards. I should have left. I should have walked away from Blackthorn that dawn when the prison lay hollow, its cells gaping like sockets without eyes. But I did not. Perhaps I was bound, as the warden once said, chained by knowledge too heavy to cast aside. Or perhaps the prison itself would not let me go. The silence was unbearable. A fortress once swollen with the sound of men now echoed with nothing but dripping water and the groan of settling stone. Yet I was not alone. I felt it in the way shadows lingered too long, in the way the air seemed to press back against my lungs. Something remained. When the sun rose high, a rescue party came, 5 guards from the outer post, men who had not been present during the night of screams. They marched inside with rifles and lanterns, their voices brash, their laughter hollow. They called out for survivors. They called out for me. I should have answered, but I stayed hidden. They reached Block C. Their laughter died. Lantern light wavered. One of them, a tall man named Briggs, knelt before cell 43 and spat on the floor. "Empty walls?" he muttered. "Empty threats." That was when the door shut. Not swung shut, not slammed by wind. It sealed. The iron fused into the stone with a sound like bone knitting. Briggs staggered back, rifle raised, but the others beat on the door uselessly. Their lanterns guttered, casting long, broken shadows on the walls, and those shadows moved. I watched from the corner, frozen, as the black shapes stretched, twisted, and peeled themselves from the floor. Figures, thin and tall, each bearing the outline of a man, yet faceless. The guards fired, bullets sparking against stone, but the shadows only rippled, unfazed. One reached forward, its hand sinking into Briggs's chest as though his ribs were water. He screamed once, just once, before the shadow pulled him into the wall. Gone. The others followed, one by one, dragged into stone that swallowed them whole. Their rifles clattered to the floor, useless relics of a world that obeyed rules. Only one remained, a boy, barely older than 20, eyes wide with terror. He ran, stumbling through this corridor, begging for help. The walls obliged. They opened like hungry mouths, and he vanished. His scream lingered long after his body had disappeared, echoing until it melted into silence. When it was over, Block C was still again. The rifles lay abandoned, the lanterns smashed, the air thick with the stench of iron. And on the wall of cell 43, new words had been carved. Episode 14, The Prisoner's Name. For weeks I avoided speaking of him aloud. We all did. The guards who had survived those nights whispered only numbers, 43, never the name, as if keeping it unspoken might keep it forgotten. But stone remembers. And one night Blackthorn revealed what we had tried so hard to bury. It began with the chaplain's ledger. I found it in the rubble of his abandoned office, pages warped with damp, the ink running like black tears. Most of it was sermons, lists of confessions, meaningless scribbles. But in the back, written in a hand frantic and uneven, was a single line that struck me like a hammer. "Do not speak his name, it feeds him." And beneath it, scrawled over and over, the name itself. A name older than the prison, older than the city. It was not English, not Latin, not even language as we know it. It was syllables that cut the tongue, a sound you felt in the marrow rather than the ear. When I tried to read it, my throat burned. The walls seemed to lean closer, listening. I slammed the ledger shut, but it was too late. That night, the name began to whisper through the prison on its own. The wind carried it down the corridors. The pipes groaned it in hollow tones. Even the rats, those that had returned, squealed the rhythm of it in their frantic scratching. The whole of Blackthorn was speaking his name. The prisoners woke screaming. Some carved the letters into their own skin, blood dripping onto the floors. Others pressed their lips to the walls, murmuring the name with a lover's devotion. By morning, 3 men were dead, their throats torn open not by blade, but by their own voices, ripped raw from endless chanting. I confronted the warden then, demanded the truth. His face was gray, his hands shaking, but his eyes still burned with the fire of obsession. He confessed everything. He told me his name the first night I locked him in. Blackwood rasped. He made me speak it. I thought it gave me power, that I had bound him. But every time I said it, I bound myself. We all have. That's why he smiles. Because he doesn't need to escape, he only needs us to speak. I wanted to shout at him, to strike him, but I couldn't. Because even then, even as he spoke, my tongue itched. The name curled at the back of my throat, desperate to slip free. And I knew, if I spoke it aloud, I would never stop. That night, the name carved itself into the walls of cell 43, glowing faintly like fresh embers. Prisoners moaned it in their sleep. Guards muttered it under their breath, and I I heard it in my own heartbeat. His name was no longer a secret. It was a seed, and Blackthorn was already the soil. Episode 15. The Last Night in Blackthorn. It was the night the prison breathed. The walls swelled and contracted as though lungs pressed beneath the stone, every corridor inhaling the terror of those within. The name of Prisoner 43, unspoken by lips but pulsing in every vein of Blackthorn, hummed through the floors like the toll of 1,000 unseen bells. We all knew this would be the last night. None of us would leave unchanged. Some of us would not leave at all. The warden gathered what remained of the guards in the mess hall, candles flickering weakly against the storm clawing at the windows. His face was drawn, eyes sunk deep into sockets, the parchment of sigils clutched in trembling hands. "We hold the name inside us," he said, his voice brittle as glass. "And because of that, we cannot kill him. We can only join him." The room erupted, shouts, curses, denials. But even as they screamed, the sound of chains rattled above, around, within. The ceiling cracked. Dust rained down. One by one, the candles extinguished until only the warden's flame remained, casting him in a circle of trembling light. Then the doors burst open. Not by wind, not by storm, by will. The darkness poured in like water, carrying with it shapes. Shadows taller than men, stretching, bending. Their faces blank but smiling, with mouths they had no right to possess. They filled the room, surrounding us. The guards fired rifles, each shot swallowed by the black before it could echo. One man dropped his weapon and bolted for the hallway. He made it 3 steps before the floor split and swallowed him whole. The warden stood unmoving. He lifted the parchment high, and for a heartbeat the sigils burned again, bright and defiant. But then a voice filled the room, shaking the marrow of our bones. "Your prison is finished. You were never the keeper. You were always the kept." The parchment ignited in the warden's hands. His scream was brief. When the flames died, only ash remained, floating in the stale air. And then he appeared. Prisoner 43 stepped from the wall as though it were mist. Not shadow now, not whisper, but whole. His body was gaunt, his skin pale as frost, his eyes glowing faintly with embers of unending hunger. He smiled at us, at me, with the serenity of a man who had already won. "Thank you," he said softly. "You opened the door." The walls shuddered, chains cascaded from the ceiling, dragging the screaming guards into the black. One by one, their voices were cut short. The room emptied. The storm outside went silent. I remained, alone. He stood before me, tilting his head as though studying prey that had surprised him by surviving. His lips moved, but I heard no sound, only the word inside my skull, a word I will not write, a word that is not meant for paper. Then he stepped back into the wall, and Blackthorn went still. By dawn, the prison was gone. Nothing remained but an open field of broken stone and silence, as though it had never been built at all. And I, the last witness, carry his name in my chest like a curse. It waits for me to speak it. And when I do, another door will open.
Epilogue: The Survivor's Burden. They call me mad. Those who hear my story laugh, or else cross themselves and walk away. They see only an empty field now, a patch of broken earth where Blackthorn once rose. And they say the storm must have taken it, or time, or the weight of its own decay. They cannot fathom that a building can vanish, that walls can breathe, that shadows can smile. But I know. I was there. I am the last witness. Sometimes, in the dead hours of night, I wake to the sound of chains rattling against my walls. My home is no prison, yet the iron sings as though Blackthorn itself is creeping back. Stone by stone, brick by brick, I hear the name in my dreams, whispered not in words but in rhythm. Like a heartbeat I cannot silence. I do not dare speak it. Not yet. For I have learned the truth. Names are doors. And every time they are spoken, they swing wider. The men who mocked it are gone, swallowed whole. The guards who thought themselves unbreakable are lost. Even the warden, who believed he was keeper of the keys, discovered too late he was only another lock waiting to be turned. I carry his name like a sickness in my blood. It grows heavier each day, pressing against my teeth, begging to be released. And I fear that when my body finally breaks, the word will slip free of its own accord. Perhaps that is what he wanted all along. Not to escape a prison, not to flee into the world, but to plant himself in us, seed by seed, until the walls are no longer stone but flesh, until we become the doorways. I have burned the ledger. I have buried the parchment. I have prayed until my knees bled. None of it matters. His name does not need ink or paper. It only needs memory. And memory is a prison with no locks. If you hear it, if the syllables ever slip into your ear, do not repeat them. Not even in thought. Because the moment you do, you will feel it too, the breath behind your shoulder, the shadow stretching across your floor, the smile blooming in the dark. I am the last to walk free from Blackthorn. But I am not free. I never will be. Because walls are doors. And he is still waiting.